Welcome to the Random Green Podcast. On today's episode of the Random Green Podcast, I want to talk about a very famous, well, not necessarily a famous person, but a famous, it would be a famous person if everybody knew this person's life story. I'm going to talk about none other than Darryl Quincy Montana from Cheyenne, Wyoming. He's a grocery store, supermarket cook in the delicatessen, deli for short. And like I say, he has an amazing life story. So Darryl Quincy Montana, was an amazing person. He was born on... Well, let's see here. I'm going to go through my records here. He was born September the 3rd of 1987 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, like I said. But he went to Cheyenne East High School, and after high school, he went on to, he didn't have the grades to get in the University of Wyoming, so he went to Western Wyoming Community College in Rock Springs, Wyoming. And he had a very interesting time there. He liked it, and he studied really hard, and really he studied and could still only muster a F+. And no matter what he did, he just could not pass. He could just never pass any test. So he said to his folks, look, I just can't pass any tests. I'm just going to have to probably work at a grocery store or something, stay in the grocery store. And he's been at this grocery store place, the grocery store in Cheyenne, Wyoming, ever since he started working there back in 2004, when he was like 16 and a half years old. But he remembered liking the grocery store, and he thought, well, wouldn't this be so bad? It probably wouldn't be so bad, he said to himself. It probably wouldn't be so bad if I could work here. I mean, I could work my way up, maybe to manager or something. And he even told this to his folks. He was like, Ma and Pa, because he called them Ma and Pa back. It's like, he's like, Ma and Pa Montana. And he says, well, first of all, Ma and Pa Montana, how come we're not in Montana, but we're here in Wyoming? And Ma and Pa Montana said, well, son, we don't know. We're just born here like you were, and we don't know what tarnation is going on. But yeah, I should drop the southern accent, because that's Wyoming. People in Wyoming don't necessarily talk like that unless they are from the southeastern part of the United States of America. But anyway, actually, that raises a very interesting point, because sometimes even like the western part of South and North Dakota, the western part of the Dakotas, they have a kind of little bit of almost like a little bit of, accent like this. Well, it's not quite like this, but it's more, kind of like this, or don't, so it's kind of like that. But anyway, getting back to the amazing true life story of, I'm just checking some records, going through paperwork here. I'm just busy at the podcast center. Darryl Quincy Montana, he went on to be, after he went to college and he really studied, he really sincerely studied, and he had a tutor, and the tutor tutored him to try to do what's right, try to get the grades up, and he just couldn't do it. So he didn't get the loans. The loans were adding up, so he said, enough of this. I'm just going to go back to Cheyenne, beautiful Cheyenne, and do my just work at the grocery store, because he was still working the grocery store at the time. He was still working the grocery store at the time, part-time, that is. And it was truly kind of an interesting specimen, Darryl Quincy Montana, because, again, Darryl Quincy Montana was studying pre-psych wasn't pre-psychology, it was pre-sociology, and he couldn't, it was the most basic. He even had an open book test, and he still couldn't pass it because he had just, again, he wasn't, like I say, the most studious individual out there, but he really wanted to get a college degree, but just never could finish it, and never really. He didn't have the smarts for it, but he was really good. He was a really decent cook. He was really amazing. He was one of those guys that was he had the skills to do a lot. He could cut an onion, and he could really do a lot of things. He was a cook in the delicatessen, and he made some really good dishes. He was able to make the meatloaf. He was able to follow the recipe, and he was able to make the food. And he even stocked the shelves before he was a shelf stocker, and he begged the groceries a lot of the times. But he was one of those guys that was again, one of his favorite meals to make at the delicatessen in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the grocery store that he worked at. He just did amazing meals. He was able to cook chicken and beef and potatoes. He was able to make the mashed potatoes and vegetables, cook the vegetables really good. He was able to. Anyway, Darryl Quincy Montana was truly one of a kind, and you know what? This should be an amazing story on Hulu or Netflix or something like that. This would be like I say, it would be trending. It definitely would be trending if they would make a movie about this, or at least a story, at least a documentary about this. Darryl Quincy Montana. But getting back to the delicatessen where he worked at, he made the food, and he even served the food to the people. He said, "What can I get you today, sir?" Or he didn't even, he never even said sir. Man, he said brother and sister. Well, he didn't even say that to him. He was like, "Fellow human being, what can I get you for your sustenance? What can I get you for your sustenance today?" And the customers really like that when Darryl Quincy Montana from Cheyenne, Wyoming, born September 3rd, 1987, asked them they loved it when they asked him, what kind of sustenance do you want for your sustenance? What kind of food? And a sustenance, if you don't know what sustenance, you look it up. It's an amazing. It's food. It's a lot of the stuff that he made was edible. It was amazing. It was really good. He even had seasoning to it. He would even have whenever they had. He would ask He said to the fellow. This is how he would talk to the customers. He'd say, "Fellow human being, what can I get you? Do you want chicken gravy or beef gravy in your mashed potatoes?" He asked him that, and it's like, "Well, thank you very much, Mr. Darryl Quincy Montana." Then they even said his full name. They were just blown away with awe and wonder. They were like, "Holy cow! Thank you for serving me." I mean, they were just floored. They were on their. They just couldn't believe how friendly Darryl Quincy Montana was when it came to asking what kind of sustenance they wanted at the delicatessen. Like, would you please? They would ask him, "Hey, Darryl Quincy Montana, would you please give me extra chicken gravy?" And Darryl Quincy Montana says, "Well, it's against regulation, but I'll go ahead. I'll go against the grain." No pun intended, because grain, there was bread next to when he said that. He was like, "No pun intended, grain. There's bread right here." And the customers they just thought they should be like, they said, "Darryl Quincy Montana, you should be a comedian. You're so hilarious. You're so amazing. Thank you very much for asking me what kind of sustenance I want. And you're asking me, do I want meatloaf or chicken or ribs?" Sometimes he made the best ribs there at the delicatessen there. And it was like, he even put extra sauce and the barbecue sauce on the ribs, and everybody was truly impressed with that. But one thing Darryl Quincy Montana again said that he was really upset that he couldn't pass pre-sociology. Actually, it was pre-sociology at the community college he studied. So it was like the most basic test. He just, again, a test, just, he was just never a test taker. In fact, he was one of those individuals that there was like religious people that came to his door once. The Jehovah Witnesses came to the door, and they were talking about, well, there's a final test at the end of the 1,000 years, and Darryl Quincy Montana says, well, I'm not going to be able to pass that final test because I'm not going to be. There's no way I can do that. So you're just going to have to go on to the next door because I'm not going to be able to do that. I read up on your we guys are the Mormons or the Jehovah's, and he's like, you Jehovah's, yeah, I'm not going to be able to. Probably going to be able to pass that test, And this was actually, it wasn't that door. There was this Jehovah Witness at the delicatessen that gave him a Bible magazine, or a magazine that had said, "Will you be able to survive the bloodthirsty God's judgments before the 1,000-year reign starts, so he can live for 1,000 years and then take that final test?" And Darryl Quincy Montana said, "No, I remember. I read up on the Jehovah's and the Mormons, and the Jehovah's, I think, are the ones that are they're the ones that say that you don't have eternal life. You don't even, there's no hope for, and till after the 1,000 years, and even still." And he was telling this one guy, and then after that there was an NBA player that. I almost forgot to mention that Darryl Quincy Montana was almost 8'7", about 9 feet 3 inches tall. And before I get to this story, I'll tell you the current story that I was on. He was talking to a Jehovah, and they're big on the Nephilim. They're like, you Nephilims are 10 feet. They're going to be 10 feet tall. Are you a Nephilim? They asked. The Jehovah asked the Darryl Quincy Montana, "Are you a Nephilim?" So Darryl Montana said back to the Jehovah, he said, "Look, I am gonna. I told you I'm not going to be able to pass the final test. I'm not a Nephilim. I'm just tall." And Darryl Quincy Montana said, "How did you become a Jehovah anyway?" And then the Jehovah said, "Oh, I was a born in." And he goes, "Oh, well, that figures." Darryl Quincy Montana says this back to the Jehovah. It's like, "Oh, that figures. You're just a born in, huh? Yeah, well, that figures." And he said, "Look, how come there's not many, what's up with China not having a lot of numbers, and India, and you look at Asia, and look at all the other countries?" And the Jehovah says back to him, "Well, it's not. You can't really look at it that way. You can't really look at it the way. You just got to look at this. Yeah." And then Darryl Quincy Montana says back to the Jehovah, he says, "Well, what about 1970? What about these scriptures that clearly state?" But I'm getting off into a little bit of a tangent there. Let's talk about happier things, not depressing cult things. Let's talk about when he talked to the NBA player. Again, Darryl Quincy Montana was 9 feet 3 inches tall. 9 feet 3 inches tall was Darryl Quincy Montana, right? So he says to him, as he was saying to him, as he was talking to the basketball player was saying, "You're tall." And he's like, "Are you a Nephilim by chance?" And then Darryl Quincy Montana says, "You know what? Just for that, I'm not going to give you chicken gravy. There's just a Jehovah here asking me about. There was a Jehovah asking me about if I was a Nephilim. Now you're asking me if I was a Nephilim." And then the basketball player says, "Just take it easy. I overheard the conversation of the Jehovah asking you about he was asking you about being a Nephilim. She was asking you about being a Nephilim." And to make a short story long, a long story short, but it's one of those things where he says, "I'm sorry about that, Darryl Quincy Montana." And Darryl Quincy Montana says, "Well, thank you very much. And you know my name too? I never seen you before." It's like, Well, you're big news down at the YMCA. That's where we play basketball there. And Darryl Quincy Montana goes, "Well, thank you very much. Would you like? Maybe I will give you some extra chicken gravy." And then he gave him some extra chicken gravy, and so the basketball player was just floored because this basketball player is about probably 7'4", 7'5", 7'6". One of the shortest players in the basketball. The Cheyenne basketball team, the professional basketball team, has the shortest guy is like 7'1", 7'2", and the rest of them were, 7 feet, big time, just huge, just really tall guys. But they were really small compared to Darryl Quincy Montana. But Darryl Quincy Montana, a lot of the scientists wanted to investigate Darryl Quincy Montana. They wanted to go over there and talk to him and say, "Look, Darryl Quincy Montana, we want to see if you're the missing link." And Darryl Quincy Montana says back to the scientists, this is after the Jehovah and the tall basketball player, he says to the scientist, he says, "Yeah, I think I am part of the missing link. Sausage link. I crave a sausage link." and the scientists were like, "Whoa, you got to be kidding. That's amazing. Truly an amazing story. Truly an amazing story, or truly amazing joke. This is a truly amazing story. I mean, you're probably on the edge of your seat. You're like, whoa, please, I wish this podcast would last 6 or 7 hours. But in good news, it's going to be under 5 hours, at least. Maybe. Yeah, it should be. Anyway, Darryl Quincy Montana was one of those guys that just truly, really cared for people. And he really, even would, when Mormons and the Jehovah's would go to the place of work, where he was at the delicatessen, he would say, "Look, I'm not going to be able to pass the final test. So, Jehovah's, I'm going to, like I say, I'm going to put blood in your food." And then they're like, "Oh, no, I can't do that. You can't. No blood, no blood, no blood." It's like, oh, jeez. You got to be kidding me. It's like this. I tell you what, Darryl Quincy Montana was like, he's like, "I was born Catholic, and he got interested in the Pentecostal religion, where they would, I think that's the religion they would speak in tongues, and so he really liked that religion. He was like, that's me, that's me." He says to his family, he goes, they're both Catholics, like, "Look, I want to be a Pentecostal," and they're like, "Okay, well, sure, that's fine." Well, hold on. No, Darryl Quincy Montana, we can't let you get there. They speak in tongues, and that's in that gibberish. They speak that gibberish, and then Darryl Quincy Montana says back to his parents. He goes, "Hamana, hamana, 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 swing, bada, 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 swing, bada, 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 swing, swing, bada, 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 swing." And Darryl Quincy's parents said back to Darryl Quincy Montana, I said, "Darryl, that's actually that's a baseball reference, and that's what when the baseball player goes out the bat, that's what a lot of fans will say, swing, bada, 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 swing. That's not speaking in tongues." And then Darryl Quincy says back to his folks, parents, wherever you're at, folks in some countries are parents. So he says back to his parents, Darryl Quincy Montana, that is, obviously, in case you forgot. He says back to his parents, he goes, "Parents, look, Ma and Pa, I know I'm just practicing for when I become a Pentecostal and I stand in front of the congregation and speak in tongues." And a lot of the individuals that worked at the delicatessen were Pentecostal, and they're saying, "Look, Darryl Quincy Montana, you should join our religion. Really, the only way to salvation is to be a Pentecostal." And said Darryl Quincy Montana says, "Whoa, well, I suppose I better. I hope one day I'll be able to pass the final test or something." And then the coworker said, "Wait a minute, you don't like tests." And Darryl Quincy Montana says back to the coworkers, he says, "I'm just speaking in tongues." And they just, once they heard that from Darryl Quincy Montana, the coworkers just about blew a gasket with laughter. They were just floored and blown away with awe and like, wow, Darryl Quincy Montana, not only you're 9 feet 3 inches tall and not a Nephilim, and you make the best ribs and you make really good, you season the food well, you make the carrots so wonderful, and you cook the food so fantastic. You're like a delicatessen chef. And not only you're that, you could do that, but you're just so funny too, Darryl Quincy Montana, born September the 3rd, 1987 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and really wanted a college degree but couldn't pass the pre sociology degree. He couldn't even pass that. He got like a 35% in that one of the tests. But like I say, Darryl Quincy Montana was one of the better human beings in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Cheyenne, Wyoming is truly fortunate to have a wonderful delicatessen chef that will make the food wonderful for the folks, for the individuals in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and even the surrounding communities. Even the communities that are near Cheyenne drive to the delicatessen because they hear of Darryl Quincy Montana's amazing, amazing food skills. He's able to cut an onion. He's able to chop peppers and one of just amazing food. You know, there's not really a lot of cutting the vegetables. It's more there's you got to cut them up and but he's one of the best. He's truly is. He says even one of this another interesting thing about Darryl Quincy Montana, born September 3rd, 1987 in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He tells his delicatessen manager, he says, look, perhaps we can use a little more seasoning today to spice things up, make it more seasoning so they can or put more seasoning on it. That way there's the customers that can kind of complain about the meatloaf being a little bland, so let's put a little more salt and pepper on the meatloaf. And boy, the delicatessen manager was like, you know what? That's probably a good idea there, Darryl Quincy Montana. Man, I have a stiff neck looking up to you because you're so tall. You're 9 feet 3 inches tall. Holy cow. And the delicatessen's like 4 feet shorter than he is. 4 feet shorter. Because the delicatessen manager was only 5 feet 3. And he's like, holy cow, Darryl Quincy Montana, I suppose maybe I'll just say, yeah, you can probably put whatever you want in there, as long as it's within reason. So I don't have to keep on looking up to you when I talk to you. It's like, this is the delicatessen manager saying this. It's like, man, you're so tall, Darryl Quincy Montana. I can't believe you're so tall, 9 feet 3 inches. And then the delicatessen manager asked him, you know what he had asked him? You know what he asked him? You know what he asked? He said, are you a Nephilim? So that was an amazing true story of Darryl Quincy Montana, born September 3rd, 1987 in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Truly one of the most remarkable stories out there that could easily fit into an amazing story, an amazing movie that would probably be able to have remake after remake after remake after remake on this story alone on Darryl Quincy Montana, born September 3rd, 1987 in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Again, Darryl Quincy Montana will go down in the laurels or the halls, the annals, or whatever, the records of people that lived on planet Earth, amazing people that lived on planet Earth. One of the tallest individuals in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And Darryl Quincy Montana emailed me and said, you know what? There's more taller people than me in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So Darryl Quincy Montana replied back, or I emailed back to Darryl Quincy Montana. I said, Darryl Quincy Montana, oh really? There's more taller people than in Cheyenne, Wyoming? And then Darryl Quincy Montana emailed back to me after I emailed back to him. He emailed back to me. He says to me, in his email he says, "No, I'm the only Nephilim in Cheyenne, Wyoming." Thank you very much for listening to the Random Green Podcast. You all have a great day.